Hey everybody, and welcome to my Inox Drifter starting class video for Frosthaven. This is the easiest of all of the starting classes in terms of complexity, maybe even the easiest class we'll see in Frosthaven in general, but that by no means means that this isn't a fun character or an interesting one at all. In fact, I think this can be really good, and I think it has a lot of flexibility compared to some of the other characters and will probably end up being quite a fan favorite. You know the drill. If you do enjoy the video, please consider tossing it a like and subscribing. I do have impressions videos for all of the Frosthaven classes you can see down below. I just have the Blink Blade left to do, so that will be coming shortly, and then hopefully you guys will have all of the information that you need to decide on who you're going to play when we get the finally now delayed Frosthaven. Of course, if you do want to come hang out on Twitch, I'm over at twitch.tv/mandatoryquest every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday, playing Gloomhaven Digital usually. So come hang out and talk about Gloomhaven, Frosthaven there, or if you've got any questions, I'm always happy to answer them live. Okay then, so without further ado, let's check out the Inox Drifter. So the Inox Drifter might be one of the most versatile characters really we've ever seen in Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, Jaws of the Lion. This character has lots of different persistent abilities that allow you to improve the different actions that you do, which in turn kind of gives you these different builds that you can go, and this flexibility that you don't usually see. So this is going to be a great character. I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy this one because it's going to slot in very well to pretty much any party at all, and will be quite easy to play and very rewarding for playing too. So this is going to be probably going to end up being one of the kind of more stronger and fan favorite characters, I think, from the starting group of Frosthaven, or at least one of the most commonly played. So as you can see, as a Drifter, you have many persistent bonuses which use slots which greatly enhance your capabilities. Whenever a bonus is triggered, e.g. each individual attack or movement, advance your character token one space. To keep these bonuses active for longer, use abilities which move your tokens back. So we've had persistent abilities before. This is something that many characters have had in Gloomhaven before, and there's some in Frosthaven that have these too. But the unique thing about this Drifter is being able to move those tokens back. So being able to potentially get a lot of value out of these bonuses that you can get as you do these certain actions. And that's what makes this character kind of sneaky strong, really, is the fact that your individual actions might not be great, but you are getting so much extra value every time you do them because of these persistent bonuses that you have. Importantly, though, you see the stipulation here that you only get the experience points when you move the token forward, not when you move the token backwards. So you can't kind of keep jumping between two to get infinite XP or something like that if you wanted to. That's important here, but does mean, however, that you can earn an XP point twice, right? Because you can go past it and then move back and then go forward again. So you can still get XP. And this character, I think, has quite a lot of potential for some fast XP growth just because of this effect. That does mean that you can't earn crazy amounts of XP, but being able to just go backwards and earn that same XP point again is quite nice. And I imagine that we'll see that reflected in the kind of amount of XP that we're going to see on the cards, because realistically, we're going to be earning a lot of XP through hopefully using these persistent bonuses really well. We have a starting hand size of 12 and 10 HP, so that's really nice. We're definitely on the tankier side of character and with a huge hand size. Probably because of these persistent bonuses, you are going to have some out. So although this does say 12, really our practical sort of hand size, if you like, of what we're going to be playing is probably going to be a bit lower than this, because we're going to want to have at least one or two of these persistent bonuses out. So 12 is just basically facilitating the fact that we are having these cards that are permanently out, and yeah, they basically out of our hands very quickly. So as you can see, we have a complexity of 1 out of 5 on the Drifter. Definitely the easiest character out of the starting characters in terms of complexity, and potentially throughout the entire game. I don't know how many characters we're going to have with 1 complexity, but it's probably not going to be very many because Frosthaven has been designed with more of the advanced player in mind. So if you are brand new to Gloomhaven, you've never played a Gloomhaven game before, and you're thinking, hey, I want to start Frosthaven, Frosthaven's really piqued your interest, then perhaps Drifter is going to be the character for you, because in my opinion, this has got a very elegant and simple design with these persistent abilities, very easy to understand on how you kind of get your value and how you do your damage and how you add all of these different effects together, right? It's just a very simple one to understand, and the interworking of the moving the tokens backwards and forwards is something that I think pretty much everybody can grasp, even from the get-go. So this is going to be a character that a lot of new players are going to play, but also I think just because of the elegance of design and how simple it is and the flexibility, I think it's going to be quite popular with veterans of the game too, just because of the fact that you can go in any direction that you want, and if another character retires and perhaps you lose your healer, for example, perhaps that person retires their character, you've always got that flexibility to maybe move a little bit of your kind of build towards that healing aspect. And I really like that. I really like that you can fill in the gaps with this character. And this is definitely going to be a character that I would recommend with a 2-player party for sure, because it's just going to be able to fill in all of those gaps of things that you're missing potentially. You see, we have no elemental affinities, so we have no synergy with any of the particular starting characters, I would say. There's nothing above and beyond here, I think, to write home about how this character will work with others, except for the fact that this character can just fill in all of the gaps. In terms of what we can do pretty much everything. So we've got melee, range, support, and defense, all as sort of our middling stats here, or high to middle stats, I guess. Mobility is slightly lower and control a bit less, which means that we're not going to have access to probably things like immobilize, disarm, curse, muddle, things like that are probably going to be on the lower half for us, but we are going to have quite powerful melee damage, range damage, support, so healing, and defense shielding kind of capabilities with this character. Okay, let's take a look at the cards. So Crushing Weight is our first card and our first persistent ability. So on our next 6 melee attacks, add +2 attack, which is a big plus. Anybody who has played the Mind's Weakness and played the Mind Thief will understand how powerful just being able to do something like this is, obviously in conjunction maybe with some of our other attacks. We'll have to have a look into that as we go. But this is potentially very, very powerful. Obviously, this is a loss, but this is a persistent ability, and we're going to have the ability to move this backwards and forwards, hopefully, throughout the entire scenario. So realistically, this says 6, but I think we're going to try and trigger this and get the value out of this a lot more than 6 times. So being able to add +2 to your attacks is obviously incredibly strong, depending on what attacks we get. A very, very damaged focus and a melee damaged focus card right off the get-go. Really excited to see this, and this is just going to give you a buff to that. Also importantly, it will buff your default actions, so this is just melee attack. So if you do want to do just a melee attack 2 as your default, this will make it an attack 4. 71 initiative is late, but it's not as late as it could be, so pretty underwhelming initiative on a card like this. However, with an ability with the top, maybe you don't want to go too early. You've got heal 2 on the bottom with range 2. Then we've got the first instance of this effect. So move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. So this is kind of important here because obviously if we were to play this card out and we'll have this out, we lose this bottom ability. So there is things that you have to think about here. And this is where the build kind of decisions are going to come for you on how you want to play your character, right? Because as soon as you play this out, you're then going to lose access to this sort of support side of your character, which is the heal side. But having a heal action on the bottom of a card is generally pretty good. It's nice to be able to just chuck this out and maybe do an attack at the same time, maybe remove a poison from somebody or a wound or potentially even a brittle in Frosthaven. So there's lots of things that you can do with this. And obviously this is really what makes our character tick. So being able to move the token back. So I quite like this. I think you're very happy to do this. And my main reservation with this character going into it initially, when I first looked at the character, was that if these abilities are not tied on to things that are at least usable in some way, right? I feel like we want to move our character tokens back, but is taking up a whole turn just to move one character token back really worth it? And you're definitely going to have to figure that one out, because I'm not too sure if it is. But if we get lots of little abilities like this tagged on, which are situationally useful, then I think that that's absolutely fine. And I think, you know, this is like 2 halves of an action, which I think make a full action. So pretty happy with this. And I think this is pretty good. But if I'm going to go for more of the kind of melee damaged build, then obviously I really want the top. If I'm going for a support build, then obviously I want the bottom. This is going to be quite a hard impressions video to do, because I'm not going to be able to necessarily tell you, hey, you should always take this card. We can evaluate cards, but obviously the top of this is very, very strong, I would say. You know, anybody who's played with the Mind's Weakness will attest to the fact that that card was very strong. So this card will also be equally strong, I would think. Next, we have Sustained Momentum, which is an attack 2. Move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Nice. So here we've got the kind of the other side compared to the last card, which was the heal 2 and move 1 back. Now we've got the attack 2 and move 1 back. And this works obviously really, really well with Crushing Weight. This gives this, makes this an attack 4 if we use the top of Crushing Weight. And we get to move the token back on that space. So the ordering of the abilities on the card is quite important here. This little line here that you can see just in the middle of the card, that delineates that it's a separate part of the action. So basically you do the action independently of each other. So that way that we can basically do this attack 2, Then we get to maybe use this to move this along. And then we get to move on to this part of the card and we can do this. If you can reliably attack 4, I think pretty much all the time, like if you can keep the fact that crushing weight, if you can keep crushing weight up the entire scenario so you're getting that +2 every single time and you'll keep moving this token back on this, I think that's incredible value. Being able to attack for 4 just throughout the entire scenario, that's above the power curve of level 1 in general. You know, most characters will be attacking for about 3. So that will make you quite a powerful character and a good damage dealing character if you can get to that 4 or more number, I think, pretty reliably, and you can keep crushing weight going for the majority of the scenario. 76 initiative is not great for an attack. You know, we might want to do this early. We may want to do this late, but generally speaking, you want to try and kill things before they get to act. On your next 6 move abilities, add +2 moves. So here we go. We got a persistent 1, which allows us to increase our moves. So similarly to the default attack 2s, the move 2s will also now be move 4s potentially, which is nice. And this is, I think, one of the sneaky good ones, actually, from this character. I think being able to move a decent amount is often forgotten, really. It's like the unsung hero of Gloomhaven, right? I think a lot of people, myself included, go for all the flashy stuff. You look at all of these cool abilities, these cool effects, and maybe you forget to bring those few little cards that just help you actually get through the dungeon, right? You can't really understate how important move really actually is. And especially if you're going for like the melee build, it's a little bit difficult here, right? Because you've got a good melee attack on the top here that really works with crushing weight. But this is also something that the melee build might care a little bit more about because you need to get towards enemies and sometimes they might run away or be difficult to get to and you need some more movement. Stuck at back of rooms and things like that. Or perhaps you might want to open doors. It's a bit of a counterplay between the two because I do think that, you know, having a lot of movement is obviously going to be great for a melee character. So we'll see. But this, I think, is sneaky good and definitely something that you don't want to really forget about. Perhaps we can use sustained momentum for the top for a little while, and then maybe you want to transition onto this. Certain scenarios in Gloomhaven where you have to just get, you know, from point A to point B as quick as possible. You just need to get out, right? It's just escape. An escape style scenario. Something like this will be very strong. So precision aim. All your ranged attacks have +1 range. On your next 6 range attacks, add +1 attack. So this is similar to the melee one, obviously, but this is actually ranged. Not quite as much. We get an additional range instead of the additional 2 attacks. We get 1 attack, 1 range rather than just 2 attack. And that is useful though, depending on the cards that we obviously have. We haven't seen a ranged attack yet, so that is obviously going to be very dependent. But if we have multi-target attacks, or if we have some very good ranged attacks, but perhaps the range is a little bit underwhelming, and that additional range could come in good use. And also, ranged attacks are generally a little bit more powerful than melee for a few reasons, right? With ranged attacks, you can hide, hide behind obstacles, traps, or whatever, and attack the enemy safely. You don't need to put yourself into danger. So there is a little bit of risk involved with being a melee character, right? You need to get up in enemies' faces. If you miss an attack, then immediately you are the focus of their attack, potentially, because you're right next to them. So there is definitely some risks involved with being a melee character. So having a ranged character, I think it makes sense for this buff to be not quite as good, because generally speaking, ranged kind of damage-based characters do have a little bit of an advantage anyway to begin with. Really, really cool. I think this is obviously on the same kind of power level, potentially as crushing weight. I don't think you're going to want to run too many of these. You're gonna have to be a bit careful. There's going to be opportunities, I think, where you want to maybe play a persistent ability right at the beginning of the dungeon and you play that and you kind of move that one around. Maybe you get another one out as you go. Maybe you have 2 out at a time, and then once you're kind of happy to transition, you maybe get rid of those and you put maybe another one down. We'll see. You might have to end up choosing between either crushing weight or precision aim, but I think equally both of them are very good for, you know, what it is that they're trying to achieve. 66 initiative is kind of worse, I guess, than the 70s because it's not quite late. It's in that awkward no man's land of middle initiative, which we don't really like. You've got move 2 and move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Wow. Okay, so this one I think is probably the best one we've seen so far. You're always going to want to move. You are always going to want to move. You can obviously combo this quite nicely with the move one here, being able to move 4 and move the token back potentially if you want to. But you're always going to want to move. It's just going to happen. And then being able to potentially just get a little bit of a bonus, I think this is really strong. Out of these 3 so far, I would say that this one is definitely one that I am saying that I think I would play this card just for this bottom effect potentially. even if I had no intention maybe of playing the top. And if you can get an item like a pair of boots, for example, that just allows you to add an additional 1 or 2 movement. So let's say if we get boots of striding and now we can do a move 4, that's going to be really useful for a melee character or a tank character in particular. So I think that this is very, very usable for all of the different builds, which is good because then you've got one half that's specific to one build, and one half that will work for pretty much everyone. Compared to the other ones, again, like you're only really going to want sustained momentum, I think, if you are doing the melee build with crushing weight. And you may want this, but you may not want this as other builds. So this one's probably a card that is more particular to a certain build that you're going. This one potentially too, although this is okay. I think that this is the first one we've seen, which I would just slam dunk take this one regardless of what build that I'm playing, even if I don't care about precision aim. Next, we have Continuous Health, which is an attack 2, range 2. So there's that first ranged attack that we have. So potentially this could be an attack 3, range 3, and move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back one space. So again, just basically doing the same as what Sustained Momentum did, but as a ranged attack, right? And so giving you that ranged option, which I really like. Being able to attack for 3 at range 3, I think is pretty much base level power, or was base level power in Gloomhaven. If you look at a lot of characters from the starters and what kind of abilities and things that they would have. So this is just a good, useful, reliable attack at range 3. And yep, you'll take that every day. Take that straight to the bank. you really like that. But it's nothing special or nothing really to write home about. It's certainly just on point with the power curve. 61 initiative, another pretty bad initiative, no man's land initiative here. We haven't had a good one yet, so I'm hoping we get access to maybe some better ones, especially if this character has got a tank build. We're going to need to have some early initiatives to make sure we can get in there and be the focus. So on your next 6 heals, add +2 heal, another persistent ability here. I think this one is probably one of the weaker ones that we've seen so far. I generally like to play more aggressive, so unless my character is special at playing support, for me, if I have the opportunity to go for a more of an aggressive build, I generally tend to go down that route, just my personal preference. This, I think, is probably the weaker one, just because of the fact that, let's say you're poisoned, and so the target that you're healing is poisoned, right? Well, you increasing that value to an additional +2 is not really doing anything. You're still just removing the poison, right? And you're using a charge, which you might not actually want to do. You're never going to say no to an additional attack. I mean, maybe if the enemy's at 1 health, but you're always happy to just be sure of something because maybe you draw your -1 or your -2, right? It's always nice to just sort of over attack something just in case, something could happen. Increasing the heal amounts can sometimes be quite good, but I think is generally I'm quite happy with heal 3. I feel like heal 3 is a good level to be at. Anything below that needs to be kind of a bit more consequential. So as you can see, you've got like a heal 2 on the bottom here. I think that this would make it into a heal 4 at range 2. I mean, it's a decent heal, but also I feel like the heal 2 is reasonable because you're going to use it maybe to just remove a poison or a wound or a brittle or something like that. This is probably the most underwhelming persistent ability that we've seen so far. But again, a lot of that comes down to my own personal playstyle. So next we have Relentless. Move the character token on 2 of your persistent abilities back 1 space. So this is encouraging us to have 2 persistent abilities out to start with, which I think is reasonable. I think most Drifter players will probably pick a couple and have them out. But my main problem with this particular card, though, is the fact that it doesn't really contribute towards you trying to win the scenario. I don't like cards that are essentially do-nothing style cards. One of the reasons why I don't really like looting cards is that I find the looting system sometimes to be not arbitrary, but I don't like the fact that sometimes I have to take an entire turn just to loot, or if I have to take 2 turns to set up a good loot action. That's not fun. The fun for me is, attacking enemies and interacting with the board and doing all of that kind of fun stuff, right? That's where I personally find fun in the game. So this, I feel like, is just a card that's maybe facilitating what it is you do. However, it's very much to your teammates going to be basically around where you say, I do nothing. Because the top action is generally the most premium action that characters get. Generally speaking, where most of your attack actions lie. Not always the case, but generally speaking, it's where all of your best abilities and where your attack abilities and the ways that you help your team lie, right? And you're basically going to say, I'm doing nothing this turn. Maybe you'll move on the bottom or maybe you could do that heal. But there's not a lot you can really do to help your team. And I'm not a huge fan of those. So the main use of this that I can see is to use this between rooms. So when you are potentially You've cleared a room, and before you open the door to the next room, you just want to play the top of Relentless, get some extra value out of those persistence, and then move on and long rest and carry on. I think that's probably where I sit with the top of this. I don't really like it, but maybe it might be a necessary thing for this character. It's hard to say until we really get playing and I get that feeling of, okay, actually, I'm burning through these persistent abilities maybe a bit too quickly. So maybe I do need Relentless. And perhaps the fact that we do have a few cards that maybe sit a slightly above the power curve. This is kind of like the downside, if you like. So this is the leveler of this character. So although we can attack for 4, right? Well, our melee attacks can all be 4, which is above the power curve. We are at some point maybe going to have to take a turn where we do nothing because we just need to rest. It's almost like a rest without really resting. Interesting, but I'm not a huge fan of just this effect on its own. I much prefer it in conjunction with little minor abilities that we have. 89 initiative is obviously late, and I think that the top of this card definitely wants you to go late because you don't really want to do anything. You just want to sit there. Although it would be nice maybe for it to be early so you could have just tanked for your team and done something, but yeah, it's to be expected. The bottom is on the next 6 attacks targeting you performed by enemies within range 2, we can gain retaliate to range 2. Interesting, definitely for the tanks. And being able to do a retaliate 2 at range 2, but the fact that it only triggers within range 2, that's important. It means that we're always going to get the value out of it, right? Now, retaliate 2 is strong. It really is, especially if you can tank this. You know, if you have the ability to play shields as well, which we'll get to soon. And then this could actually be pretty decent, especially against enemies that have low health, high shields. You know, we're looking at you, Living Spirits. Enemies like that are just really annoying to take down. Retaliate damage, just being able to go through shield. You can't ever underestimate pure damage or true damage, whichever way you like to call it. But that damage that just goes directly through shields, direct to the enemies. However, you do need to sustain an attack. So Retaliate is not as good as some other abilities that can kind of do that, just because of the fact you do need to take the damage yourself. And obviously you can't take too many hits, right? You're using your health there to try and do some damage back to them. You need some shield, or you need some other ways to be able to keep yourself in the fight. Otherwise, you may end up dying pretty quickly if you don't pair Retaliate with something else, because certainly you can't just run in with just Retaliate and hope that that's going to be enough. Next, we have Unbreakable. Move the character token on 2 of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Same ability again. See previous card for my thoughts. 90 initiative, slightly later, but again, very late. On your next 6 sources of damage from attacks targeting you, gain shield 1. So here we go. Here's the shield one, right? So this is pretty nice. Interesting that these 2 abilities are tied to what I would consider to be the 2 best tanking ones we've seen so far. Means that we won't be able to move our tanking ones back. It's interesting here, though, that these are on the bottom and we had some that were on the top. This is maybe something to consider here. Like a turn 1 play, you could, in theory, get something like, you know, Crushing Weight out, and you could get the shield out, for example, if you wanted to, or the Retaliate. So in one single turn, you could play 2 of these out. Same with the move one, I guess. So you've got a lot of opportunities maybe to do that. But the thing is, as well, is with stuff like with shield, right, and with Retaliate, you could potentially get attacked multiple times in a single turn, right? If you're playing 4-player and you're facing down 4 enemies, 4, maybe even 5 enemies, right? There's potential that you could burn through a card like this in a single round, or a round and a half, right? Depending on how many enemies you're facing, and if you are the sole tank and you are the sole focus, if an enemy draws a target to attack, you can actually burn through both of these cards incredibly quickly. Whereas the attack cards and the move cards, you have a lot more self-control over, right? You control when you want to trigger them. You know, not always, but most of the time, right? You have a good bearing on that. Whereas these are all going to be triggered by enemies who are going to be coming towards you and they're going to be attacking you. And you can't choose. This is just happening, right? It doesn't say you may, it's that you gain the shield or you gain the Retaliate. Because if you were to burn through it in a single round, that's going to feel pretty bad because you're basically completely out of a card. And in a weird way, rather than playing this, I would much rather, well, not even in a weird way, I definitely would have much rather have just played a card that had a top that said shield 1 for the rest of this round, right? Because that card, as long as it's not a burn, is going to go into my discard and I can play it again. Whereas this is just gone and there's nothing I can do about it. So I do think that these are pretty weak in certain scenario types and with certain player counts. I think that this sort of stuff, I think you could, if you are the sole focus, just completely waste all of the charges nearly in a single round, and that could be a bit of a problem. So definitely worth thinking about, and something that you should consider when actually thinking about this build. But if you're playing 2-player, you're probably not going to have as many issues with that because you're going to have less enemies on the board. So Vile Assault is attack 2 with poison, and then attack 2 with wound. And this is a burn, and this is obviously pretty strong. And I think the reason why this is a burn is obviously because of crushing weight. We can't really ignore the fact that crushing weight would make both of these an attack 4. So that could be an attack, that could be 8 damage potentially against a single target. Well, actually 9, because the poison will give you an additional point of damage with that second attack. And then also you've got that wound, which could then also do another point of damage. So this could really add up and do a huge amount of damage when you use it with combination with crushing weight. Definitely really, really good. For a burn, I think that this is, yeah, very reasonable for a burn. You'd expect this to be a burn, maybe even still worth a burn, even if you don't use crushing weight, because just the value that you get being able to apply 2 really good effects to enemies, and maybe even be able to split those effects across 2 different enemies if you wanted to, because it doesn't say that you attack the same thing, right? You just get 2 separate attacks, I think is really good. So Vile Assault is obviously really where you want to be with crushing weight, and it's going to allow you to just decimate some kind of elite enemy or some really high health enemy, I would think. You don't want to miss on these attacks though, that's for sure. But hey, I think this is really, really good. So Vile Assault definitely are our best attacks so far, and definitely worthy of a burn, and the kind of thing that you would expect to see out of a burn in combination with that crushing weight. 27 initiative is our earliest initiative we've seen so far, which is good. Nice to see that we're starting to get down there. Again, not as early as it could be, but not bad, and something that's certainly usable. The bottom is move 2, heal 2 self. Interesting. So this particular card, I quite like this. I like this heal 2 self thing, definitely. It's always nice to have a little bit of incremental heal, regardless of what you're playing. I guess if you're playing the ranged build, this is maybe less interesting for you, but you may not want this for the ranged build, although I do think the Vile Assault top is just an incredible attack if you use it with crushing weight or not. Really, really nice. You can use this reliably as you go. This also works well with both the move and the heal abilities, bonuses abilities that we have. So being able to maybe make this a move 4, heal 4 self. Yeah, that's pretty good. That is pretty good, but maybe a bit too overkill. Like I said, I don't think that the heal one is great, but the move one I think is sneaky good. So potentially this could end up being a move 4 on 27, which I think is very good. So Vile Assault, I think this is a great card. Really like the top of this. This is what I want to see from a burn, you know, just a really beefy good attack, which is yeah, definitely something we were looking for, and something that we're really going to use, especially if you're playing the melee build. But if you're playing the range build, maybe not so much, but I still think that this is a pretty decent attack. Next, we have Draining Arrows, which is an attack 1, target 3, range 2, and muddle. Okay, so here we've got a big ranged attack that we could potentially use with our ranged bonus. So with our ranged bonus, this could be an attack 2, target 3 at range 3 with muddle, which is nice. That range 3, I think, is kind of important, because target 3 is a lot of targets. But to be able to get 3 targets within range 2 of you, without you maybe being at disadvantage to one of them is difficult, right? So being able to increase that to range 3 just gives you that flexibility, and I think you're much more likely to be able to get those 3 targets. At level 1, being able to attack 3 things for 2 with muddle, absolutely great. That's, you know, 6 damage across 3 things. You're pretty happy. Obviously doesn't scale very well with shield though, so we'll see how we go with that. It just doesn't really work great against shielded enemies as you start to level up. But at level 1, as you start the game, this is going to be really, really good. So 23 initiative, great. We're going down in the numbers. Another really usable early initiative for this character here, so good to see. We have move 3. If you are adjacent to exactly 1 enemy, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Awesome. Another really, really good one. I like this one as well, because the move 3 here is going to really matter, and definitely if you're playing the kind of more melee build, then Draining Arrows top is not something that you're super excited about, but you do really like this 23 initiative, and being able to have a 3 move, you know, in conjunction with that is really powerful, I think. Yeah, this is great. I think I would be playing this card regardless. This is definitely one that I'm going to be playing. Same though with Vile Assault potentially. Both of these 2 cards so far, really, really liking them, because one half of the card is great for one particular build. You know, draining arrows is obviously, you could argue that draining arrows is still pretty good for a melee build, just to be able to maybe finish some enemies off. This is not unusable, right? And same with Vile Assault. This is not unusable for the different builds at all. But the power level really lies with that build. But the bottom is just great, really good value. Definitely something that every single build is going to want to use. Obviously, if you're playing the ranged, more support build, perhaps you won't find yourself adjacent as much. I guess that's worth pointing out. If you're playing ranged, right, you're not moving towards them. But if you're playing the ranged build, then you're playing the top of this card. So probably don't have to worry about that problem. Really like it. Definitely want to be playing draining arrows for the bottom for me, because I'll probably end up going more of the melee route. I like this character for a melee personally. But this is, yeah, I think for the range build, really cool. So prudent preparations. We have shield 1. Oh, we got an enhancement dot there, so we can improve this. And retaliate 1. Potentially this could be improved. And this is 14 initiative, and we play it out. Awesome. So 14 initiative. That's what we wanted to see. We've got like a really nice, super early initiative here. Not as early as it could be to beat every enemy, but certainly early enough to beat most. And that's all that really matters most of the time. So we're happy to have that. Definitely. Having a shield 1, retaliate 1 on the top, you could actually on the first turn go 14 initiative, play the top of this, and then play the bottom shield or the bottom retaliate persistent bonus if you wanted to. And you're immediately kind of in tank mode, if you like, for the beginning of the scenario, which is, I think is fine. You know, it's definitely something that you could do. Now, I do worry a little bit about the tank build with this character because it feels, like I said before, if you're playing with 4-player, you may just burn through those persistence really quick. And then you've got no more charges of that, and then you're just kind of left with this, which although is not bad, it's not, you know, super reliable, right? You can't short rest every single turn and just play this every turn. You really want some kind of persistent shield that is out for the majority of the scenario. So this is definitely a really good tank, and with the enhancements here, you can make these even better, either make them even better or even enhance some crazy stuff on there like bless or anything like that, or strengthen if you wanted to. I don't think you probably would. To be honest, if you're going for the tank build, these are probably going to end up being +1s, but I really like it. I think this is really strong. 14 initiative again is perhaps every character wants to take it just because of the 14 initiative. We've got heal 2, range 3. Interesting. So this is a good heal, especially on the bottom, and especially if you're playing the melee build anyway. I may end up just taking this just because of the fact that it's 14 initiative and it's heal 2 and it's this bottom is actually pretty decent. You're not going to want to move every single turn, right? So having a bottom action that allows you to do something that isn't a move when you're already in the action, if you're fighting, you know, if you're fighting a melee enemy and you're backwards and forwards between a few rounds, then this gives you a nice little heal, potentially for yourself. I'm thinking about this more as a heal self, as a melee damage character, more than I am as the support build. Of course, being able to add the additional +2 heal to make this of heal 4, range 3, I think is excellent. That is definitely above the power curve, right? But again, as we said with healing, sometimes you don't care about having a big heal. Sometimes you just want a way to remove poison or wound or whatever. So healing is not always as black and white as just more damage all of the time is generally good. That's not always the case with healing. You don't always want to use a charge of that healing for that. So I'm not so sure about the healing build for this character. It's a bit passive for me. And I don't mind playing passive when the character really speaks to me to do that. But this character to me has some really fun things they can do with damage and with movement and stuff like that. And potentially even the tanking side of things could be really good as well. I think although I've sort of said that I think it's a bit risky, there's potential here that we could make that a lot better. So yeah, the healing side of this character is definitely not one that I am super excited about, but it might be nice to have a couple of heal cards just chucked in to just help you continue on potentially, or maybe drop a heal to an ally here or there. So not using the persistent abilities, but actually just making a good use out of the incremental heal as you go. So yeah, prudent preparation, great tanking card on the top, excellent tanking card on top, excellent initiative, and a usable bottom for most kind of builds. So yeah, this may be a card that gets included anyway. Next, we have a deadly shot, which is attack 1, range 4 with poison. So this is a really nice length attack, actually. If you include the additional bonus we get, this would be an attack 2, range 5 with poison, which pretty much says hit whatever you like. At that point in time, pretty much just get any enemy in the room that you would like to get or you need to get. So super excited for that. Very strong. Very usable, and yeah, you're definitely going to take that. Good ability for sure, and probably going to be the one that you're going to use very, very regularly whenever you can. If you're going down the ranged route. Even if you're not going down the ranged route, I think that this is worth it, especially if you're playing like a support kind of build. I think as a support character, you may want to actually use this. Be interesting to know if as a support character, you could use both the ranged damage and the heal actions. That could be interesting, because certainly something like this harkens back and reminds me very much of the Tinkerer, right? With Toxic Bolt. The Tinkerer was very good because at the early levels, the Tinkerer had lots of just little useful things that they could do. They could stun things, right? We're not going to see that anymore. It was too good. But also they had Toxic Bolt, which was very, very good for just poisoning something, doing a little bit of damage, and just starting the ball rolling for your team, right? And this could very much facilitate that too. So perhaps as a support character, this could be just a very usable card too. 32 initiative is slipping a little bit. Not great, but not bad by any means. So it's just okay. Move 4 on the bottom. Excellent though. Really good to see that. Just having a flat move 4 could be very usable, especially if we don't want to necessarily have to use the movement persistent bonus. Maybe you don't want to use that one. A move 4 jump, I would say, usually ends up getting you where you need to be. Move 4 without jump, maybe not so much, but definitely extremely useful and very usable. So every character is going to need a move 4. So Deadly Shot to me is, I think this is a very good card for every single build here, because I can see even, you know, the melee characters will potentially want the move 4. The ranged support characters will potentially want just the attack on the top here, as well as potentially the move 4. And the initiative is not bad for anybody at all. So I can see Deadly Shot being a very playable card for every single build, really. So Bloodletting, attack 3. If you killed an enemy with the attack ability, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Wow. Okay, nice. We can enhance this too with a +1 if we wanted to. So this is interesting. So, I mean, potentially with Crushing Weight, this is an attack 5, very much above the curve. And if you killed an enemy, you can move it back again and potentially do it again. And this is a non-burn, by the way. This is, I think, pretty easily our best non-burn attack that we've seen so far. Maybe that ranged one is up there a little bit, because it technically can do 6 damage, I guess, across 3 different targets. But just being able to maybe get something dead really quick because you're just removing an enemy from the board could be very, very powerful. Now, I think that just being able to attack for 5, even if you don't do this, let's say you get a little bit unlucky, you draw a -1 or a -2 and you don't get it, or even if you draw your miss, right, and you don't get it, I don't think that that's necessarily, you know, oh, we completely wasted this, right? I think this is a really nice thing to get, and absolutely you want to shoot for it, but I don't think it makes or breaks the card. Just being able to attack for 5 is very, very good. And just a blanket attack 3 is not too shabby either. So yeah, Bloodletting, this is very, very strong. Really, really cool. And I like the fact that you can just move it back on any of your abilities as well. So it does make this useful for everybody potentially. We'll see. But Bloodletting top, oh yeah, so good. 65 initiative though, not amazing, because I would really like to try and do this early and try and kill something before it gets to act, but maybe we'll have to pair it with an early initiative. The bottom though is attack 1 with wound. Wow, okay. Now this is also really strong. Wow, Bloodletting, what a card. This is a very strong card for the melee attack build. I mean, attack 1 with wound on the bottom is great because you can double attack, right? So you can attack with the bottom and then attack with the top. That allows you to do a double attack on a turn, which is incredibly strong if you are using Crushing Weight, because you get +2 to both of those, right? So even though just the bottom of this with Crushing Weight is essentially an attack 3 with wound, which is really, really good. Really strong. Stronger than a lot of the kind of base non-burn stuff that we've seen out of other characters, right? Other characters, it feels like this might be a burn. So, wow. Yeah, I really like this. Bloodletting in general, this card is a hell of a card. Really strong. Probably the best card we've seen so far, I would say, in terms of just being the combo card. Like this card is, I guess, pretty unashamedly just for the melee build. You could make a case that the top of Bloodletting can be used with other builds. Maybe with the tank build could potentially be used, I guess. But I mean, you really want to use this with Crushing Weight, and the bottom of this with Crushing Weight. So, but this is super sneaky great. And also it makes me feel maybe less bad about taking some of these other cards, right? I said about the fact that Unbreakable and Relentless, I didn't really like the fact that you were taking a turn off. Well, I mean, if you could hit something for 3 with this and wound it and then just use the top to move back some tokens, that's still a pretty decent turn. So perhaps actually I've been a bit too harsh on those abilities, because if you can actually pair that with a really nice bottom ability, perhaps that could actually basically be a turn, right? Being able to attack 3 and wound something, and if you said like, that's my turn, everyone would be like, wow, that was a pretty good turn. You didn't need to do another half of a card for that to be a good turn. So perhaps I was a bit too harsh on those cards, and perhaps this will, especially if you can use something with this, then that'll be really good. So yeah, Bloodletting, amazing card, really, really good. Violent Inheritance, we have an attack 1 and we have a loot 1 on the top, non-burn as well. Nice. So potentially we could move and loot into a perfect spot, which would be quite nice. One of the main things that I don't like about loots was the fact it takes 2 turns. This does not take 2 turns to do a good loot, right? You could just move and then loot on the same turn. The fact that these two are separate from each other as well means you can do both of them, just one of them. It's completely up to you. So if you did just want to move and loot, that's completely cool and you can do that. But also you could attack something, maybe kill it, and then get to loot the token that it drops as well, which is quite cool. So this is nice. Obviously with your crushing weight, this could be an attack 3. So attack 3, loot 1, I think is very good and pretty strong. So yeah, I like this. Maybe a little bit bad for the characters. I mean, if this is the only loot card that we have, maybe a little bit bad for the characters that are not melee focused, because I don't think just being able to move and loot 1 is, yeah, you're going to do that sometimes, right? If the enemy kind of gets killed maybe a bit quicker than you're expecting and you clear a room. So perhaps that will happen. But obviously, it's better to make use of both actions on this card if you possibly can. So perhaps a little bit more leaning towards that melee build for those sort of type of characters. But certainly having a loot on the top is better than having a loot on the bottom. So I'm at least happy to see that. 70 initiative is pretty bad, but on a loot action, maybe you want to go potentially late because maybe there'll be more loot on the ground because your allies have killed some things. So maybe not so bad when paired with a loot. The bottom is move 4, attack 3, range 3, and a burn. Okay, interesting. So this is like our big kind of ranged burn that we've had so far. We had the big melee burn, right, with our attack 2 poison, our attack 2 wound, and this is maybe our ranged one. So this could potentially be an attack 4 at range 4, and you get to do a move 4 beforehand. That's pretty strong. Potentially that move 4 could be even more if you have the move 1 in as well, so maybe up to move 6. I don't think this is quite as good as the melee one, but I do think that this is pretty decent. You're always going to be happy to be able to move and attack, right? It's weird that this is a ranged attack because sometimes you might not need to move, or perhaps you want to move out of the range. But I guess if you've got the range bonus on, you'll have range 4, which is probably going to be good enough to be able to get whatever it is that you need to do. I don't think I'm as excited about as the other burn for this one in particular. And I think that you would need to get some more use out of Violent Inheritance, definitely, before you would want to do this. It's not something that I would immediately look to use, right? Definitely need to keep Violent Inheritance in your hand for a little while. You have to be careful with your burns because obviously you're going to be burning so many cards out in front of you for these persistent abilities. Maybe if you do 2 or 3 over the course of a scenario, you only have a hand size of 12, right? So you do need to be a little bit careful with these burns. You've got to be a bit frugal. Choose your spots for them. And I don't know whether or not this is powerful enough. I mean, it's solid. It is solid and will maybe do some work for you. I think this card will split some people. Unless you're playing the melee build, I don't know whether or not you really want this, but the 70 initiative also makes the top of this a little bit awkward. Perhaps you would rather just have an early initiative and use it as an attack 2. But the loot 1 might be important. The looting in Frosthaven is arguably going to be more important than it was in Gloomhaven. It was already pretty important in Gloomhaven, but in Frosthaven, it's maybe going to be even more so because of the fact that you're collecting these resources to help rebuild the settlement, right? There's another kind of little game that's in play. It's not just about you amassing gold and getting items or enhancements for your character anymore. It's also about you progressing the campaign elements of the actual game that's outside of that potentially, and the crafting system too. I think the top is great for the melee build potentially. If you can just attack 3, loot 1, you're very happy. The bottom is solid, but it's not a burn that I'm really super like, oh yeah, I can play that whenever I want. Not completely convinced on this, but the top of this is very good for a certain build. So we have our first X card, Fortitude, which is attack 3, PS2. Then we have a optional effect here, which is signified by this sort of dotted border around. which says before applying any other bonuses, we can move the character token on one of our persistent abilities forward 1 space to add an additional +2 range. So interesting. So we can kind of change this into a ranged attack. So this is a melee attack, but we could, in theory, change it into a ranged attack, which I think is also pretty interesting. Being able to, I mean, moving something forward is obviously not great. I mean, it can be okay, potentially just getting some XP, right? You'd probably want to either push forward your ranged for this, maybe your move one for this. This is, yeah, I guess it's a significant downside to the ranged build, right? Because the ranged build, you can't actually apply until you turn this into a ranged, right? So in order for you to be able to basically use this as a ranged attack, you must do this, push it forward on 1 space, could be on your ranged attack 1, might not be. And then you get this 2 range, and then you can push it forward again. So it's basically like 2 pushes forward on your ranged, or it could be, you know, 1 push on your move first, then maybe onto your range, or onto your heal first, then onto your range. So interesting. I think that this hurts the ranged build a little bit more, because if you're playing the melee build, this is just an attack 3 with PS2, and then, hey, I'm going to make it an attack 5 with crushing weight, PS2. I mean, that's very good. And you only have to move 1 token forward for that. And definitely moving tokens forward, although gets you XP, I think is actually a downside, right? It is a downside, because you are potentially expending a charge that maybe you could have used later on down the line. Perhaps your token then falls off the edge and you end up losing that persistent a little bit earlier than maybe you were planning or hoping to. So this is a definite downside, but I also feel like if you could just do an attack 3 PS2 range, this would be really, really strong. So I can see why they've done it, because ranged pierce is inherently very, very strong. So I can see why they've done this. So to be able to either attack 3 with the +2, so attack 5 with PS2 melee, or be able to attack for 4 with range 3 with PS2, I think is very, very strong. So both of the ways that you rub that are very good. But also, you know, you could potentially just use this as the tanking build. I think this an attack 3 with PS2 with just the tank, if you're not getting the charges out of crushing weight, I don't think it makes this bad by any means, because this is an attack 3 that just negates shields, which against certain enemies will just mean it's an attack 3. But against some enemies, that will really matter. Really, really matter. And we know that Frosthaven is going to have more instances of shield on enemies than in Gloomhaven. I think that the playtesters have already sort of said that, yes, there's a lot more pierce going on, and we noticed that there's a lot more pierce going on. And they said, yep, that is in direct reflection of the fact that there is going to be more shield involved in Frosthaven. So really, really like Fortitude. This is an amazing attack for the melee for sure. Really, really good for the melee build. The ranged, it's a little bit nerfed because of this having to push things back, but push things forward, sorry. But I still think it's very, very strong. So I think you still do it. It's very difficult, but it's worth saying that potentially if you're playing the ranged build with the top of Fortitude, using 2 charges across 1 or 2 cards is maybe quite a bit. So worth bearing in mind there, but incredible top here for sure. 31 initiative is decent, not great, but decent. That's fine. Whenever you kill an enemy, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Wow, so you've really given difficult decision to make here, because Fortitude top is a hell of a card. The melee build is probably more consistent, I would say, with killing enemies in terms of you're doing like single target attacks, right? But you're doing high value single target attacks, which means if you flip your ×2, you've got a good chance of killing something, right? But perhaps with the multiple targets, the range might have, you know, more opportunity. It's interesting, really, really interesting on how to do it. I think the top is incredibly strong. The bottom is situational to you having to kill things. So for example, you could play the bottom of this, right? And just by no fault of your own, just by pure bad luck, you may never kill an enemy in a scenario. You may never be the one to land that killing blow. You just might not. And that could happen. And then in that instance, you're going to look pretty silly once you've played this, because you burned a card and you've had absolutely nothing for it. So I think you have to be careful with the bottom of Fortitude. I think it could be quite good, but if you're playing like a solo player, if you're playing solo, then possibly this has some really good ways that you can just min-max it, right? Just try and concentrate on the Drifter being the killing blow character. I think that there's something that you can do there. But if you're playing like in 4-player and loads of people are acting before you and there's loads of stuff going on, you might only be able to trigger this, let's say 3, maybe 4 times. And you've got cards that can move them back, 1 or 2, that are not burns. So maybe this is a bit too much. I like the idea behind it, but perhaps this is a bit too much of an investment and maybe a bit too RNG focused. But the Top of Fortitude is an amazing attack. So, I mean, I'm going to be playing the Top of Fortitude anyway. And yeah, not really worrying about the bottom probably. Next, we have No Remorse, which is heal 3, range 3. That is baseline power level for heals. So, as we've said before, and we could potentially make this a heal 5 at range 3. That is most of the health of most of the sort of starting characters. That is, half of our health, and would be, more than half of the health of a Bone Shaper or someone like that. So useful, definitely useful. I don't feel the healing build is bad, but I feel like the healing build is just being able to add +2 to a heal is not as good as being able to add +2 to an attack. It's just plainly, the truth, really. You would much rather kill an enemy than just heal 2 points of damage and then continue on, right? You can take hold of your own destiny by killing enemies before they get to act, and then you don't have to worry about healing. If an enemy is dead, it can't damage you, right? So healing is always going to be a more passive way to play and a more reactive way to play. Being able to add +2. I mean, if you heal someone for 5, but an enemy draws a ×2 against them and kills them, then, it doesn't do anything. Or like we said before, if they have poison. So 20 initiative is something that we like. That's very good. One of our earlier initiatives. So happy to see that. But we're going to need more of a playable bottom, I think, because the top here is not something that I'm super excited about. So we've got a move 3, attack 3, then a move 2. So 3 different abilities here, all sort of on top of each other, one after each other. So we could move in, we could attack something, and then we could move away from it, or we could move onto the loot pile that it dropped. Something like that, which is quite nice. With all of our persistent abilities, this could be like a move 5, and this could be an attack 5, this could be a move 4. Obviously, that's pretty crazy. That feels a bit overkill to me, but obviously very good, especially if you're playing a scenario that's race from A to B. That's huge amounts of movement. I don't see where all of this low mobility things coming from, why they were rated lower on mobility. I think this character seems to be able to move around pretty okay to me, except I guess the fact you have to maybe have that persistent out, and maybe you can't sustain moving that token backwards on that move. I don't know. We'll have to see in gameplay. Maybe we want to prioritize just the damage ones or some of the other ones rather than the move one. But still, very good. 20 initiative. I felt it's a bit of a shame because the top is a bit of a whiff for me. I'm not a huge fan of this. If I was playing the support build, obviously this would be included, but I don't think I'm going that way with this character. The move 2 though, so you might just end up using this as like an attack 2 or potentially an attack 4, or a move 2, potentially a move 4 on 20 initiative. That's pretty decent. So perhaps this card ends up being, as boring as it is, it might just end up being a default action kind of card for you on 20 initiative. And sometimes that's absolutely fine, and a role player for different characters. So we'll see. But yeah, I think the bottom is decent for a burn effect. It is, but it's a bit overkill with the movement here, and certainly not. I wouldn't bring this card just for this bottom burn effect, and allow this card to kind of toe the line until we find the good opportunity to do this. Next, we have Destructive Fury, which is attack 3. It is a burn, and we have this nice AoE pattern here. So 2 in front and then the 3 behind those. This is a melee attack, so technically this does count towards crushing weight. So this could be an attack 5 on this many targets. I mean, that's obviously magical Christmas land. I don't think that you will reliably be able to hit 5 things with this. I think if you can hit 3 or 4 things with this, you're very happy. I wouldn't do this maybe with 2, unless obviously you really needed them to die and your back's against the wall. But I think if you could do this with 3 or 4 targets, you're very happy. I've just noticed this is a double burn card though. Traditionally not a fan of double burns, because unless they have something that you want to burn immediately at the start of the scenario, they end up dragging their weight. But however, one thing that this character does have that may be able to support these double burns is these persistence, right? We actually can make better use out of these default move 2s and these default attack 2s than other characters ever could. So this may mean that this card, is okay, because you can just use it as a default attack 2 or attack 4, sorry, on 19 initiative, or a move 2 or a move 4 on 19 initiative. That seems pretty good to me. So although I think that this is obviously a very strong attack, I generally don't like having double burns, but perhaps we can actually support this. The bomb is attack 3, range 2, and it's a little 3 hex AoE. Burn again. So potentially this could be an attack 4 with an additional range. Again, very good. So you've got a great attack for the melee build at the top, and you've got a great attack for the ranged at the bottom. This is obviously a better place, I think, for this, because you can do a double attack potentially. You can have this, and then you could potentially play an attack on the top as well. That could be really, really cool. I think that I'm leaning towards maybe taking this. It's a bit difficult. It depends on what our hands is going to end up looking like. Like I said, we have to be very careful with our burns because we're going to be playing these persistents out. And so our hand size is not really 12. Our hand size is more like, 10 or 9 potentially. So you have to be a little bit careful with that. So we'll see. But I think that this is it's definitely worth a burn. Both of these definitely worth a burn. I think like this is probably, even if you don't use crushing weight, I think the top of Destructive Fury is probably a bit better value than this, because this is, with the range 2 is maybe a bit hard to get this pattern in a range 2. But I feel like being able to move this to an attack 4 really just push it over the top. So both of them are very good for individual builds. And this is definitely a better spot on a card, being able to do this on the bottom of an action. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to the level 2 cards and beyond. So if you are afraid of spoilers, although this is technically not a spoiler, we are now moving towards the level 2 and above cards. I know that some people do like to keep these secret, and I did when I started to level initially in Gloomhaven. I like to keep these a secret so that I was surprised every time I went to a level. But actually, I do feel like looking at these cards and understanding where your character is going, like what you're sort of aiming for, if you like, is kind of important, because sometimes you need to take a card earlier that maybe facilitates something later. So just worth thinking about. But if you like to do that and play in secrecy, then now is your time to turn off. So our first level 2 card is Shockwave. On our next 6 melee attacks targeting an enemy adjacent to any other enemy, one enemy adjacent to the target suffers 2 damage. Wow, okay. Very interesting. So this is just for the melee build, pretty much. However, I guess you could also use this as the tank build. I don't see why not, because you can basically do some true damage here. So very good if you are in the middle of lots of enemies. The enemies are clumping up around you. This could be very, very good. And being able to just do 2 sort of pure damage is really strong. Really, really strong. Bit of splash damage there. It was good on the Crag Heart, being able to use stuff like Massive Boulder, right? Massive Boulder was really good. And I feel like this is more damage than Massive Boulder, but it is only one target rather than all targets. But this could be quite good. Also, it only happens when it's adjacent to any other enemy, which is nice. So this means that you're not going to waste charges. It's only going to happen really when you want it to happen, I guess. Or maybe when you don't want it to happen, I guess there's that side. Maybe you're going to end up killing something that would maybe die to a wound itself. So there is some chance, I guess, of some wasted charges, but no charges that are going to be wasted, really. This is very strong, very good for that melee build. However, it is another burn, another persistent. I mean, how many of these can we really last? Potentially, if we're going down the melee route, maybe we just have Crushing Weight and Shockwave up. Having 3 of these out, I think, is going to be a bit of a stretch. You'd have to be very good at managing them. I think realistically you want 2, and then maybe a 3rd comes in at some point. Maybe the move one would come in at some point just to help you finish the scenario off if you're a little bit slow. And if you think about the fact that it's 6, so it's 12 damage, right? It's 6 times 2 at the bare minimum. And that's if you don't do any of your shenanigans by moving the tokens back. I think you would take that for a burn. So yes, it's over a long period of time, but it goes through shield. And yeah, it's just going to do so much work. Shockwave top, amazing. 17 initiative means that we can go nice and early with this. However, you don't really care about going early with the top of Shockwave. But it's a nice early initiative. And here's why we want this early initiative. So we have move 3, shield 1. And see, the shield stays out for the round. This is really, really good tanky ability. This is like one thing that you always want as a tank, is you want a move and a shield. That's like all I look for when I'm playing a tank character, always have, and this will be very strong. And move 3 is maybe a little bit more than we would usually get. Really like this. You could also play this potentially with the other shield, right? So you could move 3, shield 1 on this, then you could shield 1 and retaliate 1 with the other one. I mean, that is 2 early initiatives used there just for one thing, but that's That would put you on shield 2, retaliate 1, and in the middle of a load of enemies, probably. This is a very, very good card. This is a very good card for just the melee build in general, actually, because the top is maybe something you don't want to use straight away. But the bottom just allows you a little bit of self-protection too. Even if you're not playing a tank, by the very nature of you just being a melee damage dealer, you will get attacked, right? It'll just happen. Either, you know, your main tank has run out of early initiatives, so they have to go late that round, or the enemy draws target 2 and you're also towards the front. There's going to be lots of instances where you are going to make use of shield, even as just a melee character. So 17 initiative, move 3, shield 1, just so that you can do a good melee attack and maybe you're a little bit shielded for that round, I think is excellent. So this is a fantastic card, definitely, for the melee build. And I don't think the range build has anything here that they're super excited about, except for maybe the initiative, which I don't think is enough. But this is definitely a great card for that melee or that tank build. The other level 2 is we have an attack 2, range 3, and then we have regenerate self. Very interesting. Ever forward. Nice. So this could be an attack 3 at range 4, which is solid. It's nothing crazy, but it's very solid. And we've got regenerate self. Now, regenerate is like the opposite of wound. It's going to keep healing you. And then as soon as you take a point of damage, basically it gets removed. It leaves you. If you've taken a load of damage and you just need to hide for a little while, or you want to rest, it's really good at just sort of giving you a few extra points of health back over the course of a few rounds. And also, generally speaking, if you're playing a ranged character, you shouldn't be getting hit too much. So I quite like the fact that perhaps you take a hit, you can play this, do some damage, you know, regenerate yourself, then you can move away or something, and you can just heal that damage up. This is a really nice regenerate. Is going to be a very good effect, I think. In Frosthaven, it's going to be one of the better effects that are coming in, and I think a lot of people are going to really like it. And there's going to be a lot of strategy around, you know, playing this on character, you know, taking some damage, then potentially playing this and running away and hiding for a little bit and getting some health back. So really solid attack here. 67 initiative is no man's land, so it's pretty bad. Not something that we really need to write home about or talk about too much, but it's not great. We have heal 1 here and target 3, range 3. So being able to do that incremental heal. So this is what I was talking about when I actually like these types of heals much more than I do like the big one-shot heal, right? Because what this allows us to do, let's say we've got our tank who's been poisoned and we just need to remove that poison. This does that. Then we've got like another ally who's, you know, been wounded for whatever reason. We can do that. If we're playing with a bone shaper, for example, we can just give them a little bit more health back, allow them maybe to play that skeleton that they need to play, right? There's just some nice synergy here, and it's much better to have these multi-target low value heals to help remove negative conditions and just help you plan and be able to give your team that flexibility. It's just much better. So this is the best heal that we've seen from this character so far, in my opinion. If you were to use the persistent, maybe turn this into a heal 3, target 3, that's also very strong. So both of these cards are good for either build that you want to go for. You've got the ranged and the support build here, and you've got the melee attack build and tanking build, and melee and attack tanking build. I think both of these are very good. I think you're probably going to be pairing the range damage with the support build elements. So that's going to be kind of like your hybrid build there. And then potentially you're going to have the melee tank build is going to be your hybrid there. So whichever one is suitable for the build that you want to play, I think you go for it. Personally, I'll probably end up going with Shockwave because I think that this is a really nice initiative, and the move 3 and the shield 1 is pretty much everything that I want playing as a melee character. So level 3, we have Fierce Barrage, which is an attack 2, target 2. Jason, another nice melee one, again with crushing weight. Potentially this could be an attack 4 on 2 things. That could be 8 damage. That's pretty nuts. Non-burn. Yep, that's some good damage right there. This character, when using those persistent abilities, and if you can use them well, it's going to be so powerful. Now, again, we're using these charges up pretty quick. So I was quite harsh on those cards earlier that all they did was move your tokens back, right? But the more and more we see this, like we haven't seen at level 2, we didn't have another way to move a token back. So level 3, are we going to get another way to move a token back? We'll see. Whether or not we have to take certain cards just to move tokens back to keep enabling our character is, I'm not so sure. But certainly if you do a lot of these multi-targets and you get the maximum value out of it, you could potentially burn through them quite quick. So yeah, definitely something to consider there. But a very strong attack, Fierce Barrage, really good. You've got 32 initiative. On your next 6 ranged attack abilities, add +1 target. So we got another ranged one here and adds another target. So that means that not only would we potentially, let's say if we have both of these ranged ones out, which by the way we could do because this is a bottom and the other one's a top. So turn 1 could be very interesting for this character if you're playing the ranged build. It's almost like giving you double damage, right? Almost. Because you're just getting a second target. It's pretty much, it's like, hey, you're just copying your attack almost. So that's very valuable. Additional targets are very valuable effects. If you have a very powerful single target one, we've got something like Everforward was not really the one I was thinking, but we've had some that are like attack 3s, right? Being able to add an additional target to that. Suddenly we're attacking 2 things for 4 at range. That's really good. So the bottom of this is really good for range damage. Like if you want to get your damage dealing ability up, you want to increase that DPS, then this is definitely going to work for you. And potentially, if you're going all in on range damage, maybe you can facilitate this because I don't think you have another persistent burn before this that you really, really need to play, right? You might want to play the heal one, maybe the move one, but you probably could sub one of those out and just play this. Whereas I think that the melee one has already had a couple that they probably want. They probably want the crushing weight, they want the damage one, and they maybe want the move one as well, or maybe the shield one or the retaliate one. So you know, they've got a few there that they may want. Whereas the range build, if you're going just for damage, or that's going to be your main focus as being damage dealer, you haven't had one yet, and this is definitely the card for you for that. Really good top for the melee build, but also just an incredible bottom, I think, for the range build. Definitely better for the range build, this bottom, than this top is for the melee build. So the other level 3 we have is dual bow, attack 2, target 2, range 3. Another decent ranged attack here. That's pretty good. Could be potentially an attack 3 with range 4, I guess, with the level 1 persistent. But difficult here for you to have to pick dual bow over the other card. You've definitely been put in a bit of a position here at level 3. Perhaps we end up coming back and taking one of these cards at a different level up, right? I think this character might have the potential, a big potential for that, considering that there's a few different builds you want to go here and you've got a lot of flexibility. So maybe more so than other characters, this character may end up wanting to go back to previous levels and pick cards just because of the nature of the way that they've designed it. This is a good solid attack. It's nothing crazy, but it's going to be a role player style attack if you are going down that ranged build. So being able to attack 2 things for 3 is strong. It's solid. So you're going to be happy with that. 26 initiative is good. Nice to see an early initiative again. And move the character token on 2 of your persistent abilities back 4 spaces. And that is a burn. Wow. Okay. Okay. How do we value that? How do we value being able to move tokens back by that much? Wow. I don't know. That's difficult. 2 of your persistent 4. I mean, that's a huge amount. That's a total of 8 spaces. That's big, and potentially would work really, really well if you went with the shockwave build. Really, really well. What a difficult card to evaluate. So hard to evaluate. I feel like this might actually be really quite powerful. This is a toughie. I mean, this resets your character. And this means that you don't have to necessarily take some of those other cards that move the tokens back. Perhaps you're playing a fairly long dungeon, used up a lot of your persistent abilities, and you're going into the final room, right? This like resets a lot of that and be like, good, now I'm back up to full strength almost, and I can continue on. I can push on. It also works really, really well when you have those cards or those other attacks that burn through your persistence really quick, right? So the multi-target ranged attacks, the big AoE melee attacks, the shield ones that just get burned up really quickly. So this just allows you to reset them almost. Not quite reset them, but as good as, pretty much. I feel like the bottom of dual bow might just be like the thing that this character wants, right? This is really difficult to evaluate because the thing is that I feel like this is very good for the range build. And the range build hasn't got a second burn right now that I'm super, super sold on. Or sorry, a second persistent ability that I'm super, super sold on. I think if you're playing the melee build, this is nice and all, but this could just potentially reset your character. And the top is not a bad attack to maybe play for the first couple of rooms. Really isn't. You've got a big burn effect here that really, really helps your character out, tied with a good value attack, regardless of if you get bonuses with it or not. Wow, I think dual bow might be the pick. I think dual bow might be the pick if you're playing the melee build. Potentially. Fierce barrage is nice and all, but maybe this is just a bit too much. Maybe this is just us overextending a bit, especially if we want to play Shockwave, which I really would like to play Shockwave, but maybe we end up just playing the bottom of this. This is going to be very situational. This character is going to have a lot of situations like this, I think, where you're going to be, depending on how you personally like to play. So if you're someone who just goes straight in and burns Shockwave fairly early, absolutely, this is great. But if you're someone who actually just decides to go move 3, shield 1 a lot of the time, then perhaps this isn't so good. Difficult. So difficult to make a decision here. Well, I think you've got 2 great options for whichever build you decide to go for here. I might end up going dual bow because this really plays to my all-in tendencies as a player, being able to just burn as many resources as I want and not be punished because I can get them back in some way, right? And yeah. Ooh. Very interesting. So level 3 has definitely got some good choices. Level 4, we have Gift of the Prey, which is an attack 3, range 3. And if we killed an enemy with the attack ability, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Okay, so we've got the ranged version here of the same thing that we had with the melee build at level 1. But we have it here at level 4, which is, I guess, a little bit awkward, maybe a bit harsh with the ranged build. But like I said before, ranged is generally more powerful than melee because you can, hide. You can hide at the back and just blink away at enemies. Maybe this is okay, but it might feel a little bit rough, for example, if you were to look at this in the context of the other one, right? But I think ranged attacks are generally more powerful, so... And this could be an attack 4, range 4. And potentially, you could have this as a target too, right? That could be really good. So if you've got this going up, you could potentially do an attack 4, range 4, target 2. And if you killed an enemy with the attack, move the character token on once. It doesn't say you move it back for every enemy that you killed. It's just if you killed an enemy, right? So unfortunately, you can't move a token back twice, only once. But still very good. And being able to maybe target 2 things with this. I feel like the ranged one here feels on the surface that the ranged cards themselves are slightly less powerful, but I think that's to compensate for the fact that there's a huge, there's huge combo potential, right? There's ways that you can make it incredibly strong. Although the card on the surface maybe doesn't look so great, if you have that setup with those persistence, then this is actually much, much better than that level 1 that the melee build gets. Move 4. And if you killed an enemy this round, move the character token back on one of your persistent ability bonuses. Nice. Okay, so this works for every single build. Well, apart from maybe the solid support build, and maybe the tank build might not do enough damage to warrant this. But this is very good for the melee build too. And being able to move tokens back, obviously great. Maybe like-for-like replacement for that move 2. But the move 2 wasn't conditional. Again, these conditional ones I like, but you have to be a little bit careful because you could always miss, not end up killing something. Stuff can happen. I wouldn't be banking on these to just always get you your tokens back. And I think you have to be wary of that. This is a nice bonus, right? Really nice bonus. I would take this card as just a move 4, probably. Maybe not at level 4, but a move 4 is good, right? And this is obviously a really, really good bonus. Really good bonus, but it is a bonus. Very solid card. Both halves of this card are great, I think. And for pretty much most of the builds, I think, would make use out of this card. So difficult to go back and take another card when you've got something like this, maybe straight away looking at you. Next card is Chunk of Flesh, which is an attack 2, heal 2 at range 1. Interesting. Okay, so potentially could be an attack 4, maybe. If we're playing healing build, a heal 4. Don't think we really care for that. And then move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Excellent. Okay, this is a great tanking card. Really, really good tanking card. being able to do a little bit of damage, then potentially being able to heal yourself, and then maybe move the character token back on one of your shielding abilities or retaliate abilities. I think this is great. It's also just solid as well as the melee build would like it too. And this is a non-conditional move the token back, which I think is useful. We might need to look for these non-conditional ones. Might be a bit more useful for you. It feels like a solid upgrade over like a level 1 effects that we have, right? Doesn't feel like incredible, but it's a solid upgrade, I would say, to what we've been doing before. On the bottom is on the next 6 sources of damage from attacks targeting you, gain shield 2. Okay, so there we go. Now we have the better shielding card. So we had the shield 1 at level 1. Now we have the shield 2. Now if you can keep this up for the entire scenario, right? If you can somehow, especially if you're playing 2-player, maybe even a 3-player, 4-player is going to be a bit more difficult if you are the main tank. Like I said, I feel like you could potentially just burn through this without realizing it in certain scenarios. If you manage to keep shield 2 for the entire scenario, that is very, very strong. Very, very strong indeed. And a certain unlockable character in Gloomhaven had the opportunity to have that. And that was basically what made their character one of the best kind of tanking characters in the game and made them incredibly strong. I don't know whether or not you want to pair this with the other shield one. Like, do you really want to go overkill and get like shield 3? I mean, maybe. Seems a bit rough, but I think if you're playing 2-player or maybe 3-player and you wanted to play a dedicated tank, this is just slam dunk, because if you can keep it going by moving the tokens back reliably, then you're sorted. You really are. It would be incredible. The only problem I see with this is, like I said, burning through it too quickly. You're going to burn through shields and retaliates much, much quicker than you are going to do through the attack ones, because the attack ones, like I said, you can choose. Whereas you can't choose when an enemy's going to attack you or if they're going to attack you. If they flip an attack, they flip an attack, and stuff's going to happen out of your control. Worth thinking about, but obviously ridiculously strong. I think you've got 2 solid options at level 4 again for most of the builds. Potentially, this is very difficult choice on what to take. I think if you're playing the range build, it makes sense to take Gift of the Prey. I think for the top, it's just solid, and the bottom is also very usable. If you're playing the melee build, though, you might actually end up wanting to go for the top for Chunk of Flesh, maybe, or you may actually end up wanting to go back and take Fierce Barrage for the top here. You've got a lot of great options with this character, and I don't necessarily feel like just always considering just the new level up options are going to be worth it. So a lot to pick out here, a lot to choose, and as I said before in the intro, this character is going to have a lot of flexibility, potentially more flexibility than any character we've seen before on the different builds that you can go. So at level 5, we have Survivalist, which is on our next 6 heals, targeting figures without ward. We get to add ward, which ward is, I think, going to be one of the standout new effects that people are going to really like having. And what ward does is it halves the next instance of damage that you take. If you take some damage, you can half it and remove ward. Obviously, if you're playing a tank character, it's going to be super nice to have. It could essentially write off an attack entirely if you already have shield, for example. Do a nice heal, ward, and then potentially you don't need to heal them as much the next time, right? So you can maybe do something else rather than healing them. So almost like heals them and protects them a little bit from a next attack, which is nice. Not super sold on this ability though. Seems a little bit weak, or at least it's not really my intention of how I want to try and play the character. Could be very good though if you do have a dedicated tank and you are playing a dedicated support. I mean, just being able to give ward to your tank very, very regularly is going to soak up a huge amount of damage. 91 initiative is incredibly late, so very, very good if you want to go super late in a round. You've got move 2, loot 1, and I think, yeah, you probably want to do this pretty late in a round. And you've got heal self X, where X is twice the number of tokens and tiles looted. Okay, interesting. So it's twice the number of tokens and tiles looted. I'm not sure why it stipulates tiles as well. And I presume it's just stuff that we pick up. Potentially, you could, let's say you pick up like 2, then potentially this could be 4. So move 2, loot 1, heal 4. Really good. Really, really very good. And something that a tank would be quite happy to do themselves, right? I think a tank would be very happy to do that themselves. A nice loot ability here, useful for different reasons compared to the other loots that we've had. However, I wouldn't be super excited about taking a card at level 5 just for its looting ability. But being able to heal a decent amount could be good. Yeah, could be quite nice. I'm not hugely sold on Survivalist, but this could be a really big heal, potentially. Could be a really big heal. The other level 5 we have is Breakthrough, which is attack 4, pierce 2. And then we have, before applying any other bonuses, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities forward 1 space to add wound. So this is an optional one again. Pretty similar to the other one we had right earlier, which was the X, but that one was to change it into ranged, whereas this is strictly melee, but allows us to add wound to the attack. I think this is very, very strong. However, moving that token forward 1 space is a considerable investment to add wound. Would I play a persistent ability that said on it, add wounds to all of your next 6 attacks? Yeah, I probably would. So I guess this is fine. This is definitely speeding up the clock on one of your cards, maybe, unless of course you split them. If, for example, you're playing the melee card, you want to make this an attack 6 with wound, and that's the only card you had out, then that's 2 charges of that card. You've got to be a little bit careful. Being able to attack for 6 with pierce and wound without it being a burn, yes please, I'll take that all day. So, and I will try my best to facilitate this, definitely, for sure, and be able to support it. 34 initiative, not great, not bad. Move 4, if you are adjacent to at least 2 enemies, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Interesting. Very good for the tank, actually. Really good for the tank, because the tank does not care. The tank is just going to be running in there, doing their thing. And having a move 4 with that ability, yeah, that's good. Also pretty good for the melee. If you're going all in on melee with no tanking, then potentially you might want to step back a little bit. You don't necessarily want to be in the middle because you don't have that shield going, right? So this is definitely something that if you have shield going, you're pretty happy to do. But also you could potentially just move in, get this back, then do a big attack, kill something with the melee build, and you're absolutely fine. Maybe there's 1 enemy left and your ally finishes them off. This is obviously a lot easier to do maybe than the kill one, because you have a bit more control over it. But if you're playing at 2-player, maybe less likely because there's less enemies on the board. So again, some of these are going to scale a little bit differently depending on your party. 2 players, less enemies on the board. 4-player, loads of enemies on the board. So you're going to have a lot more opportunity to do this, I expect. So Breakthrough, very, very solid card for the melee and shield build. Out of these 2, I think it's pretty clear here that the Survivalist is just not really fit for either of the builds. I think that you could maybe make a case for the bottom of this, but I really wouldn't advise it. I think Survivalist is pretty weak here. So if you're playing the ranged build, this is a great opportunity, I think, for you to go back and take one of those other ranged cards that you didn't take, because you had a lot of great options at earlier levels, for sure. If you are playing the melee build, you may just want to slam and get Breakthrough, because I think this is just a really solid card. But also, you maybe want to go back. It's completely entirely up to you. But I do think Breakthrough is a very, very solid card and a good choice at level 5. But I think that Survivalist is ultimately probably the weakest. But that's not a bad thing. That does give you the option, if you're playing the ranged build, to potentially go back and take one of those other strong cards that you missed out on earlier. So level 6, we have Accurate Strikes. On your next 6 attacks, targeting enemies with shields, you can add Pierce 3. Now this is amazing. It really is amazing. And the interesting thing about this, right, is that we've actually had Pierce appear a little bit before, but mainly on the melee sort of cards, right? So this is now, because it just says next 6 attacks. This does not stipulate ranged. It does not stipulate melee. So this is just attacks. So this could work incredibly well with the ranged build. Just being able to suddenly give you pierce, all of those little attacks that you had. We've got a lot of multi-target, but maybe slightly lower damage attacks. Suddenly, you're going to get pierce 3. That makes those attacks way more relevant, and giving you some good opportunity to do some damage here. And the fact as well, it only triggers on enemies with shield, means that if you've got a scenario where you've got mixed enemy types, some of them have shields, some of them don't, you're not going to waste charges targeting those enemies that don't have shield as well, which I think is really good. So you're only going to get the benefit really when you want it or you need it. I don't think that this is very good for the melee build, because like I said, I think we have some really good ways to do pierce, like mainly Breakthrough beforehand, right? We had this, which is, I mean, PS2 and PS3, obviously PS3 is better than PS2, but PS2 goes a long way, and you have some extra damage here with the attack 4. That goes a long way to dealing with the problem. But PS3, super, super good. I think the range build will lap this card up and probably really like it. Being able to support this, though, might be a bit tricky. It's now getting to that point when a lot of the classes, the builds, have maybe 3 persistent abilities that they absolutely love and they want out. So you're going to have to pick and choose. And like I said, you're probably going to end up finding one that has a bottom action that you can use in the meantime for a little while and get some good value out of it. And then you play it for its persistence. So let's have a look and see what the bottom is, which the bottom is move 2, gain advantage in all your attacks this round. Boom. There you go. This is the card. This is the card for the range build. Absolutely, this is the card for the range build. You're going to use this. You've got multi-target attacks everywhere. You've got actives that you can burn to give yourself extra targets. This is absolutely the card for the ranged build. It's still really good, I guess, for the melee, right? You have a couple of big burn effects for the melee, like that big AoE, the X card at level 1. You could make an argument to say that even the melee builds could make good use out of this, right? Advantage is an amazing thing, but advantage is even more of an amazing thing when you can target a bunch of stuff. So this is, I say, a card that absolutely that the range build will love. But the melee build could still make some good use out of the bottom of this for sure. But maybe we don't need that because we just don't have that multiple target stuff as much. So, but wow, yeah. Accurate Strikes, really, really great card for the ranged build. The other level 6 we have is Consume Stamina, which is an attack 2, range 4. So another ranged attack here. But we have Heal X at range 4, where X is the amount of damage suffered by targets of the attack ability. Interesting. So another really good ranged one here, potentially. Because, especially if you're playing that ranged support hybrid build, because if you have the additional target, potentially you could do an attack 2, target 2, range 4. Pretty nice. Then maybe being able to do like a heal 4, maybe a heal 3, maybe even more, right? Because it's the amount of damage suffered. I guess this could fall flat on its face if you were to draw a miss. Very unlucky. This could fall flat on its face and heal very little, if anything. But also has the potential to be quite a big heal, especially if you have multiple targets. Another good card here. Another good card for the ranged damage kind of support hybrid build. I like this. And as a support player, I would really like... I like the idea of me being able to contribute a little bit of damage while also contributing to the heal part, right? Sometimes it can be a little bit boring playing a support character where all you do is play the same effects, turn in, turn out, right? I play a heal. I play, you know, some kind of control effect. I play this. And eventually after time, it gets a little bit boring. But this is a way that you can actually really contribute to the team as well. So not only are you just healing, but you're also just contributing damage and helping progress the scenario. 21 initiative as well is great for this kind of thing, allowing you to heal an ally early, potentially, if they really needed it. Bomb is move 2, retaliate 2. Whenever an adjacent enemy dies this round, move the character token back on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Now this is a really good tanking ability too. Really, really good. Because it's whenever an adjacent enemy dies this round, you don't need to do the killing. And I think that's an important stipulation here. Being able to move in and do the retaliate, I mean, potentially your retaliate could also kill them or could really help out with that, right? On 21 initiative is where you want this as well, because you want round effects to be early. Maybe if you've got that shield 2 persistent out, maybe then you can start dragging that back down again. What happens if, 2 or 3 enemies die that you're adjacent to? That could really help you keep that shield 2 card out. Really, really good. Very good tanking ability. Similarly to the move and shield, you just want to have like move and retaliate. That's just awesome. Yeah, very, very happy to see that. Very happy for that for a tank. They're going to make some good use out of that for sure. Again, though, whenever you have these kind of enemy type ones, it's all about player scaling. So with 2-player, this is going to be less good than if you were to play it with 4-player, where there's potentially more enemies to deal with and more enemies that could potentially die. But also, you're going to use up your charges maybe quicker, especially if you're playing the shield, if you're playing 4-player. So this character actually might balance quite well between 2 and 4. At 4, you could potentially end up getting through your charges much quicker, but also you could recover your charges quicker. So between the two, you've got a very solid choice. I think if you're playing ranged, then you're probably going to go all over Accurate Strikes. Accurate Strikes is just very good for your character. I think both the top and bottom are insanely good. And if you're playing the tank, I think you probably end up going for this 21 for the 2 move. The top of this, I think, is also pretty good for the range, but in a slightly different way. It's a shame that you're opposite this, because this is definitely, from a damage perspective, where you want to be. But from a support perspective, this is quite good too. If you're playing the melee damage build a little bit more, You may still want to take the bottom of consume stamina. I think it's still usable, absolutely, because you could move in, do retaliate, and you could potentially try and kill something yourself and then get that to go back down again. However, this may also be a good opportunity for you to go back and maybe take something like Fierce Barrage, for example. Again, I just really like the flexibility that you have here. And this is certainly a character that I'm not willing to, at this juncture, say you should definitely do this or do that, because, yeah, I think some people are going to come up with some really inventive and interesting combinations of cards here for a lot of these builds. Level 7, we have Like the Wind. Immediately after your next 6 abilities which kill an enemy, we can perform a move 3 and jump action. Pretty nice, but we have to kill an enemy, right? We have to be the ones doing the killing. The fact that we can then move maybe away or move on to the loot spot, that is nice. Having a 3, move 3 and jump. Bit hard to tell whether or not we can sustain this though. Like I said, we've had a lot of these persistence now. And how many of them can we really sustain? I guess there's going to be some instances though when you kill an enemy and you don't really care about the move 3. But it could be nice for setting up a bottom action in a different way. You kill something, then you get to do this move and jump, and then that sets you up for a bottom action. But are you going to be planning around that? I don't know. Difficult to judge this one. It's obviously very powerful to just have a free move 3 and jump action. That's obviously very powerful. But can we sustain it? Will it really matter? Is this going to be one where we're like, oh, I really want to move the token back? I mean, how many enemies can you reliably kill in a scenario as a single player? I think it's probably unlikely that you kill many more than 6, which means that this is one that you could play out and kind of pretty comfortably not have to worry about moving the token back. Because are you going to actually kill more than 6 figures yourself? Maybe not. 77 initiative is late, but not great. Late, but not great. And you've got move 3. For each ally moved through with the move ability, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities back 1 space. Oh, for each ally move through. Wow, well that is good. No, that's crazy good, because that can allow you to move it back. Let's say you're playing with summons. If you're playing 4-player and with summons, and you potentially had the move 1 out to make this 5, and you have maybe a pair of boots that you could just add it on, you could move something back 3 spaces. Yeah, this is very strong. Obviously scales with player count again, another one, scales with player count. And also is significantly better if you're playing like with the Bone Shaper, for example, or even with the Banner Spear maybe. That could actually be a huge amount of token movement. And it's a good size move on its own. Very interesting card. I think this could be sneaky very good, and a way that you could move back tokens very quickly. The fact that it's only on one of your persistent abilities obviously is not as great if you've got 2 out. So I feel like this probably has a bit more value maybe for the melee than the ranged, because I feel like the ranged you have your target and you have your plus damage one, and you probably want to move them back, kind of keep them almost in sync. So you're using a charge of each every time. Whereas with the melee, maybe it's more important that you just keep crushing weight up for as long as possible. So perhaps this is quite good for the melee one, but it is only on 1 that you can move the token. So at the start of a scenario, it's not going to be great, but certainly once you're in the heat of a scenario and you're midway through, this could be really, really good and help you out a lot. The other level 7 is Unending Fight, which is an attack 2, move 3, attack 2, non-burn. Hello? Yes. This is another card potentially for the melee build. Wow, this is strong. Really strong. Movement on the top is always going to be good. Always going to be good. Helps set you up for a bottom action that potentially is not a move. Also allows you to switch targets, right? So you could attack 2, and because of crushing weight, maybe attack 4, potentially kill something. Then you could move 3, move on to another target, attack 4 again. Very good at just finishing off enemies that maybe are lingering there and are not quite dead yet on low health. Really, really good for that. Non-burn as well. And in fact, even if you just wanted to target one thing, this is crazy good. This could be the card that might replace that level 1 burn with the poison and the wound, because this is a non-burn version of that card, which obviously having the poison and the wound is fantastic. You obviously really want those. But this achieves similar results, non-burn, but you get a huge move 3 in the middle of it too. So potentially Unending Fight could be a good replacement for that, and it's a non-burn effect. Very, very solid. Can't underestimate this at all. Very reliable, solid attack, and a card that you're always going to be very happy to play. 25 initiative is good as well for an effect like this, so you're happy with that. And the bottom is move the character token on 3 of your persistent abilities back 3 spaces. Wow. So this is like the big version, but it's 3 of your persistent abilities. Maybe this is the one that the ranged one wants, because the ranged one's going to have the, additional damage and range, the additional target, and potentially the shield one out. That's 3. So possibly this could be the one that the ranged build wants, or the support build. Because the melee build is probably going to have, crushing weight, the attack damage, maybe shockwave out for that splash damage, and I guess maybe a shield one, or maybe the move one might be, maybe the tank build maybe has more out. Okay, this is a difficult decision between these two, definitely. I don't think you can underestimate the fact that like the wind bottom here could just reset potentially in the right situation, could just reset. You could be here and it could be like boop all the way back to the start, right? Really could be that good on something. You would need to have the persistent out to give you additional movement, and you would maybe need a good pair of boots to add on even more. Ooh, but still, this could completely reset. But this is very strong. Oh, what an interesting decision you have here. Really, really interesting decision. I guess you're probably less likely to move through allies if you are ranged as well. Or you're hanging around the back. You don't want to move through allies. You kind of want to be at range to everything, just chilling. So I say that for the range build, you do not want anything to do with this. But possibly you do want this to be able to reset everything if you're all in on damage. Or you just have 3 persistent abilities you want to play all the time. Another tough choice at 7, man. I wish we could take an extra card. I kind of wish we could take both of these cards for the melee. But, well, I guess we'll see at level 8. 2 very, very good choices for the melee build. And potentially 1 very good choice for the range damage build. If not, again, though, plenty of options if you want to go back. Level 8, we have against all odds. Attack 1, target all enemies within 2 hexes. Move the character token on 1 of your persistent abilities back 1 space for each enemy targeted with the attack ability. This is a melee attack, right? Against all odds is a melee attack. It's kind of similar to Unstable Upheaval. Target all enemies within 2 hexes. That's really quite nice. Let's say you have crushing weight, so that could be attack 3. Let's say attack 3 on 3 things. That's pretty good. And then we get to move the token back on 1 of our persistent abilities, back 1 space for each enemy target. And then we get to reset it. Wow. Okay, no, this is super strong. If we were to attack 3 things with crushing weight, so that's 9 damage, and then we get to just move them back again. And it's only on 1 of our abilities. Yeah, this is like crushing weight's best friend. Really, really is. Incredibly strong level 8 for the melee build. Incredibly strong. That's crazy. And with shockwave as well, if you had that up, I mean, you'd have to be careful because you can only move it back on 1 persistent ability, but wow. Love it. I really like these kinds of effects as well. Just allows you to go ham on the enemies, and I really enjoy those kind of abilities. 37 initiative. Okay. On the next 6 instances of an enemy entering a hex adjacent to you, that enemy suffers 3 damage. Wow, that is... You don't even have to take the damage. It's not even retaliate. It's better than retaliate. It's like super retaliate. It's like you've got a pungent aura around you, right? Foul smelling enemies get damaged by you. They come anywhere near to you. But this is as a tank, this is great. However, it has to be the enemies entering a hex adjacent to you. So it's a little bit awkward in a sense. You don't want to run up to them, and you don't want to be next to them because then they won't move, right? Unless they're ranged, of course. But then they'll move away. So realistically, this works much, much better against melee enemies or enemies that don't have attacks, enemies that just have like abilities, right? Like heal or curse or whatever, because then they'll just use melee as their focus. You kind of want to move near to them and then let them come towards you, right? I don't think it's one that you need to manage maybe as actively. Higher player count, more chances for this to trigger, but also it's going to exhaust and fall off the end of the track quicker, which means it's gone. Wow, what a card. Really, really good bottom for the tanking kind of build, or potentially even just the melee build as well, to be honest. But this is an incredible melee attack for sure. Really, really good. The other level 8 is Inevitable Conclusion, which is an attack for range 2. And we have this huge AoE here. Before applying any other bonuses, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities forward 1 space to add Immobilize. Ooh, nice. Okay, Immobilize is pretty strong. It's one of the weaker kind of control abilities from the sense that it only really affects melee enemies, and obviously a lot of melee enemies also have ranged attacks that they can draw. So sometimes it ends up being a little bit underwhelming because you play it and you think you've done a really good job, and then they just flip like their shield and heal card or something the next turn. It's like, okay, didn't really do what I wanted. But Immobilize is pretty strong, although this is a level 8 card, so I feel like this pattern is basically going to be a target 4. That's the way I would maybe see this, especially if you're playing 4-player, maybe a target 4. Yeah, you're probably going to end up using like these 4, maybe like these 4. I think it's unlikely that you get more than 4 targets here. 3 to 4 targets is probably where you're going to be at. But being able to do 4 damage at range 2, you can obviously increase this range and this to be an attack 5. You can add Pierce to this as well. So being able to do an attack 5, range 3 with Pierce 3 that's pretty nuts. Definitely worthy of a burn. However, it's a little bit sad, I guess, that as a ranged character, you've got this really big splashy effect and it's up at level 8. They've nerfed a lot of the control abilities in Frosthaven compared to Gloomhaven, or they've rebalanced them, whichever way you want to see it. The game is going to be more balanced. So I feel like this is obviously a great thing to do, but you don't necessarily want to do it. And I think it's nice that this is optional. I mean, this is a solid attack. Definitely worthy of a burn. Attack 5 against 4 things with PS3. You take it every day. So a good effect, but it is a big burn. And I think, again, you're going to need a good bottom here till this gets good. And looks like we've got one here as well. So 29 initiative. You got attack 3. Well, this is a melee attack. Interesting. And that's super good as well. But this is a bit harsh for I would say this is a little bit harsh on the range build here, because you've got a really nice big ranged burn, but the bottom of this card is maybe unusable for the ranged build. Maybe it would be difficult for them to get anything out of this. So you've got 2 cards here, which are, I think, very good for the melee build, because this is also great. So attack 3 with poison, obviously great because you can do this first, get the poison on the target, then you could play a top attack as well to immediately get the benefit of the poison effect, is what makes poison on the bottom of a card so strong. But do you really want to carry this around? I mean, this is a great melee ability. It really is. I mean, you're put in a really bad position here because at level 8, right, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get to level 9 and not take a level 9. I'm assuming that the level 9s that we get, they're going to be powerful, right? So that means also at level 8, you're kind of either picking a level 8 or maybe you're going back, but you're unlikely to get 2 level 8s, right? It's fairly unlikely. I'm not saying that's going to be the case. We'll have a look. But both of these cards, I think, are great for the melee build. If you're playing ranged, it would be nice to have a big splashy burn effect and a big AoE attack, but maybe you'll find that this is a bit too all in. So maybe if you're playing ranged, you're going to end up going back again, because you certainly don't want any of this. And the bottom of this does not really work for you either. So it's a bit unfortunate, I think, because you might struggle to take this as the ranged character. I mean, it's a great big burn effect. It's a great big attack, so maybe you just take it for that. But this is going to end up being a move 2 for a little while for you until you find a good opportunity to do this, right? Not the best use of a level 8 card, a move 2 on 29 initiative. Okay, so level 9. On the next 4 sources of 4 or less damage you suffer, ignore the damage. Everlasting. Wow. So this is the first time that we've had one that's not been 6 as well. This is only 4 sources. So could potentially fall off a bit quicker, but also it says 4 or less, right? So potentially we could, if the enemy flips a ×2, or potentially there's a big attack coming our way, then we use our shield cards instead. But the little stuff, we can maybe use this. Obviously, incredibly powerful, especially if you're playing, I would say especially if you're playing at lower player counts, because this 4 is much more easier to manage. However, if you were playing a larger player count, this could intentionally be burned in a single go through. This is really, really strong. Ignoring damage, can't go wrong. Can't go wrong. So really, really like this. I guess wound would be a bit of a bad thing for this, right? Because wound would kind of trigger this and be a little bit annoying. Got to be careful with that. Getting wounded and or self-damage, right? If you've got a crack heart in your party that's doing damage to you, that could be annoying because you'll end up using charges for little incremental damage that you don't mind taking. So that's worth saying. Not good against wound, but is a very powerful effect for sure. And it's nice to see here that you've got like a top level tank card here. 96 initiative is very, very late. Very, very late indeed. Maybe not so good for the top of this because this is quite a proactive type effect. So the bottom is heal 3, range 3, regenerate and strengthen. Okay, so we've got strengthen and regenerate here on the bottom of a card. So Gloomhaven players will know strengthen on the bottom of a card equals good. So we'll see. Before applying any other bonuses, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities forwards 1 space to additional +1 target. Wow, so this could be heal 3, target 2, range 3, regenerate and strengthen. 96 initiative is pretty rough though, but I guess you could do it for the following round. Yeah, it's awkward because regenerate is obviously it's like opposite to wounds. This happens at the start of a player's turn, so it would be really nice to be able to put that on somebody early in a round. There's pluses and negatives for playing it early or late, I guess. Strengthen on the bottom of a card is always going to be strong. Always going to be strong. It's interesting, though, that this is more of a kind of a supporty type effect, I guess. If you're playing support, this is about as good as it gets as a support player. It really is. Being able to heal two things for 3, regenerate and strengthen both of them. I mean, those 2 players are going to thank you so much. That's a big turn. You know, that's a big help for them. Frees them up as well so that they can do whatever they want with their cards on their turn. Move and attack and still have that strengthen on the next turn on that 96 initiative. Yeah, everlasting. It's a card for sure. So use every part. We have an attack 4 with range 4 and we have heal 4 here, targeting all allies adjacent to at least one enemy targeted with the attack ability. Wow, so that could be a huge amount of healing here, especially if you're playing with lots of summons or you have 4 mercenaries and you have lots of melee allies that are in your party. It could be a lot of healing. And the fact that you could use the additional target persistent ability to maybe do this to 2 things and then potentially heal more people because they're split out. Also, you can make this an attack 5, range 5 with the persistent. This is a very, very solid ability. And I can see here that you've had a couple of cards like this where you have the ranged attack kind of damage build, but it's kind of paired as well with a more supporty build. You have opportunities, I think, to support a little bit more. So the range build I quite like because you have potential to do some decent damage and some really good persistent abilities. But then you also have this kind of healing sub-theme opportunity to tack on. And I really like that if you're playing, potentially if you want to play a hardcore support, you can play that and have a little bit of range damage mixed into your lot of cards. Or if you want to play more on the damage side of the ranged, you can do that, and then you still end up with a little bit of the heal stuff as well. Because this is just a solid attack, which you're pretty happy to have, I think. I guess it's a little bit underwhelming in terms of what a level 9 card is. Like, it's not anything super, super crazy, but it's going to do quite a lot. 18 initiative as well. And you've got the bottom here is move 3, attack X, where X is the number of hexes you move through during the move ability. So this is a nice attack on the bottom for the melee. So this is like the melee build. So you've got the ranged and the melee, I guess. I guess the thing is here as well is that the melee build for me has more opportunities to use the occasional ranged ability than maybe the ranged build has the opportunity to use the occasional melee ability, right? I mean, maybe you could use this if you are playing ranged just to try and finish something off. But I feel like if you're playing melee, sometimes like an enemy is behind a trap or something like that, and you just don't quite have that range, right? You just can't quite get there for whatever reason. And so occasionally you might want to mix in a ranged attack here or there. It's one of the reasons why, level 1 spare dagger on the brute is a very usable card, because quite often you just find that an enemy is just a little bit too far away from you, or it's just something that you can't do, and you just need a little bit of ranged damage to just finish an enemy off or help out. Also, the melee build also kind of, if you like, benefits from having the occasional ranged attack. So 18 initiative with both of these abilities, great for the range build and for the melee damage build. But I think if you're going hardcore tank, then this is really, really cool and something that you want to probably play with. And if you're going super, super hardcore support, I think you probably want to play this too. Although you could, of course, strengthen yourself and then have a big turn. I think that that's possible. But maybe you might find that this is going to be more of a reliable card. I mean, it's up to you. This could end up being maybe a bit more broken, I guess. This has the potential to be a bit more broken than, let's say, this. This is just very reliable if you're playing the ranged damage build. This does allow you to do something silly, right? Strengthen, always just make things silly. So if you have lots of blesses in your deck, then obviously this could be pretty crazy. And you could combine it with this, right? 29 initiative. So you could strengthen yourself, heal, strengthen yourself, and then you could immediately try and go into this level 8 if you did take this level 8. And that could be a very, very good attack. Very good indeed. So that is worth considering, that you do have a couple of wombo combos, if you like, by playing the bottom of this. But in terms of reliability, this is obviously very, very solid and reliable ability. And so is this on the bottom here too. And just a good attack. So yeah, I think in terms of level 9s, we're not looking at anything super crazy. But the fact is, though, this character has so many options as you level up. So many different, potential opportunities to either go back to take a different card or mix it up what you're doing depending on what your character is doing. Then that'll be great. I will say that I don't think you necessarily want to potentially dilute your build too much, right? If you take like one of everything, I think you're going to end up with a very mediocre character. So definitely have it in your mind whether or not you're going to focus more on the kind of melee, like I'm going to be in melee range and I'm going to be using like some sort of tank abilities and melee attacks, or I'm going to try and be more at the back with my ranged attacks and maybe with my support abilities. And I think if you go along those general kind of rules and then you decide whether or not you want to go hardcore support, or if you want to go hardcore damage or hardcore shielding and hardcore tanking versus more into the damage, you can work along that yourself, and you'll definitely have some flexibility to find the right balance for you. Okay, so on to perks. Replace one -1 card with one +1 card. Nice, always good to sort of push our deck in a positive direction there with a nice replacement. Replace one -2 card with one +0 card. Also quite good, because sometimes drawing that -2 is sometimes as good as missing on low value attacks. So then we've got replace one +1 card with two +0. Move one character token back one space card. Now this is interesting. Obviously you're sacrificing a little bit of damage here, but potentially you are using those persistence, right, on those cards to be able to increase your damage. So this is adding an additional card into your deck too, so your deck's getting a bit thicker. I guess most builds would probably like this. Ranged builds do lots of multi-targets, right? So you have the potential to flip a lot more cards with the ranged build. Whereas with the melee build, a lot of the time you're just attacking one thing for a lot. So your deck, you may not be able to do that as much. But this could end up being a very important perk and just a very nice quality of life perk for this character. Replace two +0 cards with two rolling PS3 cards. That's kind of interesting. The thing is with rolling Pierce is that when you get it and you need it, it feels awesome. But sometimes you don't really need it, right? And especially the ranged build that has the ability to just have a persistent that gives us Pierce, and the fact that we have Pierce already on some of our really strong attacks as a melee character, I think diminishes this perk slightly. I'm not super jazzed on this one, I think, as a rolling. I think I'm probably passing. Or at least not until maybe a later perk. I think we got some better ones we can get first so far that we've seen. Replace two +0 cards with two rolling +2 cards. Importantly though, actually, just have to say that these two are replacing with rolling. So what it's doing is it's taking two cards out and it's putting in two rolling cards. Your actual draw is going to be better, right? Because rolling means that you're going to go into another card unless you have advantage. Advantage rules do mess this up a little bit. But essentially what this is doing is it is replacing, it is actually removing. It's not just replacing, it is kind of removing cards as well. So that is worth saying about. Out of these two, I think I probably like the push 2 a little bit more, just because the push 2, this character has had no instances of push, I believe. Yeah, we've had no push up to this point. So being able to push some enemies into a trap or reposition them slightly might be quite useful. So I think I probably like the push a little bit more. Yeah, this is technically deck thinning in a roundabout way, but advantage does kind of just sort of mess that up a little bit. Add one +3 card. Yeah, more damage is always going to be nice, but I think you probably want to work on I think you probably want to work on getting your deck to a nice average place before you go and add any kind of really splashy, swingy cards in like this. Add 1 +2 immobilize card. That's probably better for the ranged build, just getting a bit of extra immobilize. Maybe useful for the melee build too. Do I like this more than the +3? Probably a little bit more usable. Although the +3 can sometimes just kill something, I guess. But to be honest, apart from this one up here, which is the move 1 character token back 1 space, these are all fairly easy to evaluate from old kind of perks, I would say. Add 2 rolling heal 1 self cards. Good if you're playing the tank build. Not very, or maybe the melee build as well, but not very good, I would suggest, if you're playing the ranged build. Ignore negative scenario effects and add 1 +1 card, potentially just a necessary one. Again, depends on how many negative scenario effects there are in Frosthaven, depends on how detrimental they are to your particular build. For example, having to start with a card in your discard pile, or start with curses, start with wounds, start with poison, start with I've already taken damage. You know, there are some pretty nasty negative scenario effects that can particularly hurt certain builds. Ignore negative item effects and add 1 +1 card. So this is going to be for your tanking and for your melee characters. If you're playing ranged, it's very unlikely that you would need to take this, depending on obviously the items that we get in the game. But traditionally, this is because of armor items. And so even if you're not playing a tank, if you're playing a melee character, I just advise you to just have body armor or have some sort of shield in your hands, potentially. I mean, you might end up with a damage item in your hands, you'll see. It might not be your first perk if you're going for more of a damage-based thing, but I think it's very useful to just be able to do. It just gives you that reassurance that as a melee character, you can be a bit more braver in going into the fight. But obviously, if you're playing a tank, it is 100%. Maybe even the first perk that you end up getting, depending on how early you get that first item that's going to have that negative item effect. So we have our 2 perk one here, which every character has 1 2 perk, which is whenever we long rest, we may move one of our character tokens back 1 space. Slam dunk. Amazing. I think this is fantastic. This is allowing you to just get that extra value out of that long rest. Every single build will want this. In terms of an early perk to get, the earlier you get this, the more value you get out of it. Obviously, if you get it later on in the game and you plan on retiring, then it doesn't feel so good. But if you get this perk very early on in your playthrough at a very early level, then this is going to also accelerate your XP potential. Let's say you do 2 long rests, maybe 3 long rests in a scenario. That could potentially give you an extra 3 XP, right? Because you've managed to move that token back and use that thing again if you play it well. So there's also potential there for this to speed up your XP gain. If you can get this one early, absolutely go for it. I think this is going to be a slam dunk one, and probably one that people are going to race for, I think, or I would suggest. You may bring 1 additional one-handed item into each scenario. So this means we could potentially have 1 2-handed item and then 1 one-handed item. Also very, very good with the ignore negative item effects. Could be very good if you wanted to take 3 shields, if there are 3 different shields that you can get, or allow you to carry 2 shields and a sword of some sort of weapon. So this is going to be very particular, I think, to certain builds. The tank build, absolutely probably want this, depending on item availability. I imagine that if you're playing this character right at the beginning of Frosthaven, right? So essentially, you've just started the game. There's not going to be that many items available. Then you're not going to have any gold. They're not going to be that exciting. So you can't go too crazy with this. However, if you do come back to the Drifter later on, let's say you've progressed quite far into the game, you come back and you're coming in at a higher level, there's lots of items in the shop, you've got potential to kind of really exploit this, then this could be very good. Not an early perk that you want, because you're not going to have the gold to be able to support this early on in your playthrough. But if you do come back to the Drifter later on, or if you play the Drifter all the way up to level 9 and you have access to some great items, then obviously this is situationally could be incredibly good. The last one we have here is at the end of each scenario, you may discard up to 2 loot cards to draw that many new loot cards. So this is interesting. This is the first one I think we've seen that actually interacts with the campaign mechanic a bit more than interacts with just the game mechanic. So just the physical act of you playing a normal dungeon. What this is that the loot system has been changed slightly. I don't know if people might be aware of this or maybe not, so I'll just briefly go over the loot changes. Essentially what happens now in Frosthaven is you build a loot deck. So when you go into a scenario, you will build a specific loot deck. Now this is to put in the different resources that might be more prevalent in that type of scenario, or if there's a special item or gold or whatever. It's just to more accurately reflect what could be there, what resources and what different types of loot could be there in that scenario. So it will vary from scenario to scenario, and it could just be gold, but it also could just be like wood or cloth or these other things, or herbs that you need for the different crafting. At the end of the scenario, what you do is you still pick up those loot tokens. So those coin tokens are still there. You pick them up, but instead of just, transferring them directly into gold, you then get to draw cards from the loot deck. So 1 card per loot token. This allows you to filter those cards a little bit to try and get the resources that you want. Now, how powerful and how good this is going to be is really down to how important these resources are, right? You can see here, you've got all these different resources on the player mat here. So there's a lot of different resources, 9 different resources, and you've got gold potentially as, I guess the 10th resource that could be gotten from these, or maybe there's even items in there. I don't know, right? There's a lot of potential for this perk to be very, very good. There's also potential for this perk to be kind of underwhelming, depending on how much looting you do and whatever. So I'm not going to make a decision on this one. I really like the idea of it, though, I will say. I think this is one of the coolest perks that I've seen so far. Really, really like the idea behind it. But whether or not I can recommend it as being a very powerful perk to do is yet to be seen. But I mean, I personally would probably, if I get an early easy battle goal or something and I end up getting some check marks early, maybe through a road event, or I don't know, from some other means that we get some check marks, I might just chuck a perk in this and just see how we go, because I feel like it's quite a lot of fun and can certainly help your team and the campaign really well, especially if you're trying to avoid some of these bad events that can happen in the winter deck, right? There's this other mechanic where you're going to be attacked because of the seasons. So this could be a really good way of you ensuring that you have the resources you need to build things and make things and just survive. So thematically great for this character because it is like the Drifter. He's like a survivalist type character. Jack of all trades, really good at being out in the wilderness and hunting out those resources and collecting and gathering those resources. That's the whole kind of theme of the character. And this perk really, really well reflects that, and also has a really cool gameplay implication too, potentially. So I think for the perks, I'm all about this double perk. I think that's going to immediately improve every single build if you can get that. The negative item and scenario effects, again, are going to be down to your different builds, and you also have some really good ways of improving your deck, and also just have a really good perk here in terms of moving your tokens back as well. So, but with a lot of these characters, I think all of the early perks are probably going to end up down in this lower half because they are very interesting and also really do benefit you getting them early. So there we have it, the Inox Drifter. I think a really good flexible character, lots of different ways that can be built. I'm sure there's going to be some more optimal builds that will come out with people playing them and people exploring this character, and there will be some more sort of builds that come out that will be stronger or potentially better. But also I feel like it just does a great job of filling in the gaps for a party. If you don't really know what to play and you're not really sure what your play style is, this might just be a good character for you. Jump in, try a bit of everything, and then maybe if you start to feel like after level 1 you think, actually I'm really enjoying this aspect of the character, then go ahead, then you can play that aspect of the character. So I think that that's really, really valuable, and this is certainly going to end up being a character that a lot of people are going to play, potentially come back to play. And especially if you're starting the game for the very first time, it's the first time you've ever played a Gloomhaven game, first introduction to the system, this character could just end up being a slam dunk, really enjoyable character for you, and yeah, a really great introduction to the game. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking it. It does really help me out here on YouTube on growing the channel, and consider subscribing if you're interested in more Frosthaven stuff coming up. I just have the Blink Blade left to do on my first impression series. You can check all of the others down on my channel down below, but I also make Gloomhaven guides, and I'm hopeful to actually do some Jaws of the Lion stuff soon in the future too. And of course, you can always catch me live over at twitch.tv/mandatoryquest every Monday, Wednesday and Sunday, streaming Gloomhaven Digital usually, so come hang out and you can always talk to me live there. Okay then, all that's left for me to say is thank you again so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I will catch you in the next one. Bye.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh,
Scout
that's the blessing from Cab.
Yeah.
That's the blessing
So,
from.
Isaac, at this point, can we get your approval to add an additional attack modifier deck for allies in the digital version?